Ever feel like, economics is kind of this big mysterious machine like churning away in the background,
Hmm.
spitting out all these policies and market trends, and we're just supposed to like go with the flow.
Right.
Today we're really diving deep into how that machine
We
works
are.
with expert speaker. And our guidebook for this journey, Dani Rodrik's Economics Rules.
It's a great choice, too, because Rodrik gets it. He lays out like the elegant design of economics, those core principles, but then he's also honest about the quirks, the limitations. It's like he's giving you a peek under the hood.
Yeah, and showing us where like all the duct tape is holding things
Yeah,
together, right?
exactly.
Which I appreciate because he doesn't get bogged down in dry theory. He goes right for those real world examples.
He does.
And some are wild. Like he talks about how Singapore tackled its traffic problem, right?
Oh, yeah.
And you'd think more roads, right? That's the intuitive fix.
Seems logical.
But it often backfires.
Big time.
Singapore realized just building more roads, it actually just encourages more driving.
It's like you build it, they will come.
So they got clever with pricing instead.
That's right. They looked at congestion pricing. Classic example of how you can use incentives to shift behavior.
Exactly. Instead of just like making it impossible to drive, which no one wants that.
Right.
They made it more expensive at certain times or in certain zones.
And it worked. But the thing is, this principle, it's not just about traffic. Think about it, your electricity bill. Higher during peak hours, right?
Totally. Or like when online stores jack up the price during a big sale because demand is so high.
There you go.
No.
It's all about understanding how people respond to those costs and benefits.
Exactly. And how those change all the time. Okay, so that's like one example, right? But Rodrik, he's got a whole bunch of these case studies.
He does.
Another one that really stuck with me was this anti-poverty program in Mexico, Progresa.
Ah, yeah, later renamed a couple times, but same idea.
Right. And on the surface, it seems so simple, like give mothers cash.
Seems straightforward.
And there's a catch.
There is. And this is where, economics goes beyond just here's some money, hope it helps. This was a conditional cash transfer.
Yeah, so the mothers got these payments, but only if their kids were enrolled in school.
And attending regular health checkups. Can't forget that part. It's about investing in the future, not just a quick fix.
Totally. And it works so well because it's hitting multiple problems at once. You're addressing poverty now, but you're also encouraging education.
And preventative health care, which pays off down the line. It's really elegant in a way.
It makes you wonder, like, how could we apply this kind of thinking to other social programs?
Right.
Like, what about universal basic income? Could you build in those same kinds of incentives?
See, that's what I love about how Rodrik uses these examples. It's not just like, here's what worked in the past, the end. He's saying, this is a framework, let's apply it to today's problems.
Exactly. Okay, so we've talked about these real-world cases, but we can't talk about economics without talking about models, can we?
We can't. And, some people roll their eyes at models.
Oh, I know. It's like the stereotype, right?
Yeah.
Economists and their models.
Exactly. But Rodrik, I love that he leans into this. He even talks about how economists have those mugs that say, like, economists do it with models. Okay, I can totally see that. But he's making a bigger point, though, right? Like, why these models, even if they're not perfect, why they're essential.
Exactly. Think of it like, imagine trying to navigate a city without a map. Could you do it? Maybe. But it'd be a lot harder. Models are like maps for understanding complex systems.
It's about making those assumptions clear, right?
Yes. You define what you think you know
Mm-hmm.
and what you don't know. And just like you wouldn't use a subway map to go hiking in the mountains.
Oh, true.
You need different economic models for different purposes.
So there's no one model to rule them all.
Exactly. It's about choosing the right model for the job.
Understanding its limitations.
And using it to gain that clearer perspective. It's a tool, just one tool in the toolbox.
So how do we know which model to use? And when? That's where it seems like.
It gets tricky.
Yeah.
And sometimes even the experts get it wrong, which I think we should probably talk about.
Oh, absolutely. We got to talk about when those models fail us, because it happens. And this is where I think economics gets really interesting, because it often reveals like those blind spots in our own thinking.
It does.
Like we think we know how things work,
Right.
and then economics comes along and is like, nope, you're wrong.
It can be humbling.
It is. Rodrik has this whole section where he talks about intuition versus reality.
He does.
And one of the big ideas there is this thing, general equilibrium thinking, which, okay.
Yeah.
Sounds kind of intimidating.
It does, a little.
Yeah.
But it makes sense once you wrap your head around it.
Okay, so break it down for us. What is general equilibrium? And why should we, like the average person, why should we care? Okay, so imagine you throw a pebble into a pond, right, and
Right.
get that splash.
Yeah.
But then what happens? Well,
Bubbles.
exactly. You get these expanding rings of consequence. General equilibrium is kind of like that. It's about considering those wider impacts, not just the immediate effects of, like, a decision or a policy change.
So it's like looking past that initial splash to
Exactly.
see, like, how are the ripples, how are they moving outwards?
Exactly.
Okay, do you have an example from the book, like something that really brings this to life?
Yeah, absolutely. He talks about highly skilled workers in the U.S., right? So, like,
Right.
your engineers, software developers,
Yeah.
people with specialized knowledge.
Got it.
Now, you might think intuitively, if we increase trade with countries that have lower wages, won't those highly skilled workers lose out?
Hmm.
Because their jobs are going to be outsourced.
Right. That seems like the obvious conclusion.
Right.
Because we're always hearing about jobs going overseas.
Exactly. But that's where general equilibrium thinking comes in. Because you got to zoom out, see the bigger picture. As the U.S. exports more to these growing economies, it also creates new opportunities here in those sectors that are exporting, right? And guess what? Those sectors, they often demand highly skilled workers.
Oh, interesting. So it's not just a simple, like, jobs lost, jobs gained equation.
Yeah.
It's like the whole landscape shifts.
Exactly. And you might see displacement in certain industries for sure.
Yeah.
But overall demand for those highly skilled workers, it can actually increase,
Right.
leading to higher wages, new opportunities, things we didn't even think about at first.
It's like you said, you miss those ripples if you're just staring at the splash.
Exactly. And this isn't just some like abstract economic theory, right?
Yeah.
This has real world implications for businesses, governments, even in our personal lives. If you're making a big decision,
Yeah.
you can't just think about the immediate impact on you. What about your family, your community? Those ripple effects, they matter.
We're all connected. Sometimes I think we forget that.
We do. But, okay, let's be real. Sometimes, even with the best intentions, even with these fancy models, economists get things wrong.
Oh, yeah.
And Rodrik, he doesn't shy away from that. In fact, he has a whole section on the limits of economics.
He does. He talks about the 2008 financial crisis.
Big one.
Yeah. Which I think it's fair to say most people did not see coming.
Not at all.
But what's so interesting is he says, look, the tools to understand what was happening, they existed. Like the models were there.
They were.
So what went wrong?
Well, that's the question, isn't it? And this gets at something that, honestly, I don't think we talk about enough. It's not just about having the right tools. It's about which ones we choose to use.
Oh, interesting.
Which models become dominant, which ones end up shaping how we think about the world.
So it's almost like there's an element of human bias.
Oh, absolutely.
Even within like the science of economics.
Yeah, and Rodrik's point is, in the years leading up to the crisis, there was this huge emphasis on efficient markets.
Oh, right, right.
Like this idea that markets will basically self-correct.
They'll figure it out eventually.
Exactly, and that let the market do its thing. It sounds good on paper.
It does. Especially to people who don't want a lot of government intervention.
Right, but that emphasis on efficient markets, it came at a cost. It meant that other models that focused on things like asset bubbles, irrational exuberance, systemic risk, those were kind of pushed to the side.
They weren't as popular.
Exactly. And it's like we put on these blinders, focused on one particular way of seeing things.
And missed all the warning signs that were right in front of us.
Right. And this is why I think Rodrik is so valuable. He's not afraid to critique his own field, you know? He's willing to point out those blind spots, those biases. His point isn't to say efficient market models are useless. No, they have their place.
Right, right.
Ah.
It's about not putting all your eggs in one basket.
Exactly. It's a cautionary tale about putting too much faith in any one model, no matter how appealing it might seem. Because the world is messy.
Right, the world's messy. And those models, they're always simplifications.
Always. And so we have to be willing to question the prevailing assumptions, especially when they sound a little too good to be true.
Okay, so we've talked about when economists get it wrong. What about the critics who say economics itself is too narrow? Like it's all about money, markets, it's missing the bigger picture.
Right, right. Like where's the humanity in all this? And Rodrik, he gets that. He devotes a good chunk of the book to addressing these critiques head on. He doesn't shy away from them.
And I think it's one of the big criticisms, right? Like if you try to put a price on everything.
It's that old saying, right? You can't put a price on love.
Exactly. But Economics kind of tries to, doesn't it? It's like, how much is a human life worth?
Right, and that gets uncomfortable fast.
It does. But Rodrik, he's like, okay, let's not shy away from this. He says one of the big critiques is that by putting a price on everything, even things we hold dear, like protecting the environment.
Yeah, or like social good.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's like we're eroding these other important values.
Because they don't fit neatly into that cost-benefit analysis.
Right. And we start to see everything as a transaction. Like, I remember when people were debating paying kids to read books.
Oh, yeah.
And part of me is like, yeah, sure, incentivize reading. That's great. But then...
But then it's like, are we cheapening it?
Exactly. Are we turning reading into just another way to, like, earn a buck? What about the intrinsic joy of learning?
That's the dilemma, right? Where do you draw the line?
And that's what Rodrik does so well. He brings up these thorny questions. He's like, look, are there certain things that should just be off limits to market forces? Like, where's the boundary?
It becomes a philosophical debate as much as an economic one.
It does. And it makes you realize economics, it's not this separate thing. It's intertwined with ethics, with politics, with all these bigger questions about, like, what kind of world do we want to live in?
Exactly. And that's what makes it so fascinating, right?
It does. It's not just about, like, crunching numbers. It's about values. It's about choices.
It's about understanding those trade-offs.
Right.
And I think that's one of the most valuable things Rodrik does in this book. He reminds us that economics, it can be this incredibly powerful tool, but we have to use it wisely. We have to be aware of its limitations.
Be aware of the blind spots, which, brings us back to this idea of economics as this machine we were talking about earlier.
We're all part of that machine, though.
We are.
Yeah.
But I feel like after going on this deep dive with you and really spending time with economics rules, I understand how some of those gears turn now. Like, I might not be an economist,
Right.
but I could at least spot a loose screw or two.
That's huge, because the more we understand how it all works, even just a little bit,
Right.
the better equipped we are to ask the right questions, to challenge those assumptions, and to be more informed citizens, really, which I think is what Rodrik is going for. He even says something like, economics is too important to be left to the economists.
I love that.
Yep.
Because it's true. We're all affected by these forces.
Yeah.
So if someone's listening out there and they're like, yeah, economics, not for me, sounds boring, what would you say to them?
I would say, give this book a shot. Economics rules. It's not your typical econ book. It's engaging. It's thought-provoking, and it will make you see the world a little differently.
I think that's the best endorsement you can give a book.
I think so, too.
Well, on that note, I think we'll wrap up this deep dive into the fascinating world of economics. Expert speaker, always a pleasure picking your brain.
Likewise.
And for everyone listening, thanks for joining us.